Episode Heresy is finally here, which means we have a bunch of nerfs but also a bunch of buffs as well as new aspects and improvements, so it's time to dominate the universe with some new builds. So today we're opening up the Season 26 class builds playlist, and first up I introduce you to our brand new Titan Arc build. Now if you think Arc Titans were great in the past, well let me tell you guys, you haven't seen anything yet. With the brand new Arc aspect for the Titan in the game, the Storm's Keep, that introduces a new Arc keyword called Bolt Charge. Not only are we going to cause some powerful Arc lightning attacks almost every few seconds, but we're also going to use those bolt charges to trigger a series of events within our build that just makes us even more powerful. We are going to use the classic Skullfort exotic, which also got buffed this season, so it now grants energy to our Arc melee abilities when hitting targets with melee attacks, which includes an unpowered melee attack as well. With the bolt charges, the Skullfort and a bunch of other parts of the builds like chaining vault shot jolting effects, getting ionic traces, using a bunch of artifact perks and other stuff, we're not only going to have infinite abilities almost all the time, but we're also going to be literally unkillable, and while all your teammates are dead and you're one of the last people standing because they used all the revive tokens, you're going to be laughing with a ton of health while they are sitting around with a pixel of health about to die in one shot, because we are true Arc gods and they aren't. Now guys, if you find this one useful then be sure to leave a rating, comment, subscribe and share for more, and now let's get these bolt charges. Roll the intro. Okay, starting off, I want to mention that if you like this build video and you want to see more new and updated builds like this one, then below is a full playlist where you can find all my best latest builds for this season, and they will also be over on my Mobalytics page that contains a dim link as well. Now firstly, I do want to mention one thing, sort of like a disclaimer, because I don't want people to take this build into the nether and just die like I did here because you're there with constantly no health. We don't just get health out of nowhere, this isn't a restoration build. If you want health on the spot, go check out a solo resto build. The downside with this build is that we need at least one enemy to trigger health regen, and that's it. So as long as you can run around punching a bunch of enemies, chaining lightning and killing them all with melee abilities, you will constantly get health back, but also have health regen activating all the time too. The way this build works is similar to the classic Arc melee build we once had in the past, where you'd run around spamming infinite melees for health regen, as well as a damage boost, except this time it's buffed out even more, so we now have a larger area of effect due to the bolt charges when you do max out the stack and it throws out that lightning attack. I am just going to call this bolt shot because why not, but the way this new bolt charge system works is you need to continuously damage enemies to charge up bolt charge stacks. This goes up to 10 stacks, and once you have 10 stacks, damaging an enemy with an Arc ability will trigger the bolt shot lightning attack. Now this isn't the main part of the build, the main part is actually at the bottom of bolt charge, which states that receiving a stack of bolt charge grants melee energy, and you might think, well what is the point of that when we're using the Skullfort exotic? Well, the Skullfort doesn't refill your melee fully if you either miss or you don't get the final blow on an enemy with the melee attack, which in harder content that might happen quite a bit. So by gaining both bolt charge stacks and ionic traces, we will refill all our abilities pretty fast. Since we're using the new Arc aspect, the Storm's Keep, what this does is allow you to gain a few stacks of bolt charge instantly when casting your barricade, and standing behind it will also give you stacks too, which will passively go up. And at the max stacks, just dealing weapon damage while behind the barricade will release the charge so that you can get more stacks and don't have to use your abilities. Think of it like a banner of war that pulses but faster. So we're going to just constantly get melee energy from that, and that's basically how bolt charge works for us, for our build. Just make sure that you actually run a barricade, ideally a rally one for the shorter cooldown, then you'll be set. Now how you'll actually use the build is you'd start by placing down a barricade. This will instantly give you bolt charge stacks and passively grant the stacks for standing behind it, and then at max stacks, shoot an enemy to release the charge and rinse and repeat. The charge basically acts like a vault shot on weapons, but you're going to get occasional ionic traces if you're using Arc weapons, which is just going to give you more ability energy, and as you saw, that one ionic trace does give you a fair amount of barricade energy back, but we are going to be generating hundreds of these for a lot more energy, so let's get to it. Run around killing enemies with Arc weapons, use grenades for jolting enemies which can also stun overload champs, spam your melee abilities on enemies for health regen and health on kills, as well as refunding the melee ability, get kills with Arc weapons, keep spamming barricades and abilities, and use your super to just obliterate everything. Now in a much more intense situation, things might feel a little slower, and your abilities will recharge a bit slower too, because you won't always be killing ads constantly. You might be dealing with a boss or taking a short break from killing, but as long as you have enemies around, then the build will remain pretty consistent throughout. Now, as I mentioned before, we are using the Skullfort exotic helmet because this did get buffed. So what it does now is trigger health regen and fully restore melee charges on arc melee final blows, but also melee hits grants some melee energy as well. When we pair this with the Thunderclap melee ability, we can just quickly spam the ability, which will give us a decent area of effect too. So that is the melee that I chose to go with, just because it is more consistent in my opinion. For the aspects, we do have the Storm's Keep, which I mentioned before, for the bolt charges, but we're also going to be using Knockout as the second aspect, so that our melee range and damage is increased when critically wounding a target or breaking their shield. But also defeating targets with melee attacks makes us amplified and also restores additional health. You want to become amplified for a few reasons which I'll get to soon, but jolting is going to be our other effect that we want to constantly be applying because of the fragment Spark of Ions, where defeating a jolted target or a target with bolt charge creates an ionic trace, which will give us that ability energy for more uptime. We also have Spark of Shock, so that arc grenades jolt targets strong against overload champions, and just another way to apply jolt. Spark of Resistance for additional damage resistance when surrounded by enemies, and then lastly the Spark of Discharge fragment, so that arc weapon final blows have a chance to create an ionic trace, and collecting them also grants bolt charge stacks. So you can sort of see how these effects start to benefit each other, which is why our primary goal is to create ionic traces and bolt charge stacks, while applying jolt effects too. And then being amplified, which will happen pretty much all the time, will then give us more benefits, which I'll get to in a moment. A good way to jolt enemies is to simply run arc weapons with Volt Shot, because this will cause a jolt on its next hit after you reload when killing an enemy. It is the most basic and easiest way to keep applying jolt effects, which will keep that loop consistent of getting ionic traces and bolt charges. Volt Shot does come on a few craftable weapons like this scout rifle that I just showed, and also the Ikilos SMG. It can come on exotics as well, but I do recommend avoiding exotic primary or special weapons, because you ideally want a strong heavy weapon that will benefit the build as well, mostly for ad clearing. I chose to go with the Thunderlord because final blows with the weapon cause lightning strikes and also grants a stack of bolt charge, which can also stun overload champions in all seasons. Since overload machine guns are a thing this season anyway, it means any good arc machine gun will also be a good option to use in endgame content like GMs. When it comes to the artifact, there are a few things that you're going to want to use for this build. The first major artifact perk is Overclock and Load, where while you are amplified or have bolt charges, arc weapons have increased reload speed. We will always be amplified though because of the flash over perk, where while you have maximum bolt charges, you also become amplified and lightning bolts deal more damage. Even without this perk, we should always be amplified as long as you're going around killing enemies with melees, since the knockout aspect is going to give us the amplified when getting melee final blows. The next perk we have is Hold the Line, so while surrounded, machine guns gain even faster reload speed and final blows heal you, so this just makes machine guns like Thunderlord extremely useful and more powerful this season. The last few perks I chose were Photonic Flare, so defeating an exhausted target with arc damage releases a blinding burst, and the Dreadful Finisher, so we can spawn special ammo on powerful combatant finisher final blows. And when it comes to the final two, I'd go with the Heavy Ordnance Regeneration to buff our ability regen further, and the one below also just for some extra juicy bonuses. If you are using a linear or normal fusion, then go with Particle Deconstruction so you can maximize your DPS output. For mods, there isn't really much you can do with them these days, most of them just aren't great, so I'd go with mods that reduce your cooldown of abilities and then just leave it at that. But by using this build setup exactly the way I have it, you will constantly be getting almost infinite abilities for the Arc Titan this episode for Destiny 2 Heresy or Season 26. It's not the best build overall, but in my opinion it's one of the best Arc builds for the Titan currently, as a dedicated Titan Arc Striker build for the Arc subclass specifically, and it will do a great job in this season's seasonal activity if you decide to take this build in there, because health regen in that activity isn't great. So guys, give this build a try, check out the playlist down below for more top builds this season, and until then take care, and I'll see you guys over in the next video. Peace out guys.